It's a Taliban official in Kabul. The relevance here, of course, is that the United States government has blamed the Afghani government for harboring Osama bin Laden, who may or may not be responsible for the events that have happened here in the country today, and therefore the Taliban response. The president, who was in Sarasota, Florida, when President Bush, when the first attack on the Trade Center.
All right, there you have the latest from Kabul in Afghanistan. The Taliban foreign minister dismissing suggestions that either his organization or Osama bin Laden had anything to do with this, although we keep in mind what Neil MacDonald told us earlier today, and some of our security and terrorism experts have suggested whoever was responsible for this had massive organization and the ability to do it, and the Osama bin Laden terrorist network is assumed to be one of those, definitely with that kind of potential. Now, let me try and bring you up to date on a number of things that have happened in the last few minutes' time as we continue to look at a mixture of live. These are live pictures from New York City and some tape reconstructing some of the events of earlier today when two aircraft hit into the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers. Both have been destroyed. Both are now lying in rubble on the ground, with the after effects still very visible nearly 2 hours after the last tower dropped to the ground. The U.S. President, George Bush, is now going to be, we're still told he will be making comments shortly, but he did scrum with reporters when he landed in Louisiana a short time ago. He flew from Florida to Louisiana. It was unclear exactly where he was going to be flying to. Obviously, massive security precautions underway in the United States. He has had a number of comments to make in that short scrum with reporters at the Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, U.S. Air Force Base. Obviously, he said, quote, "We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts." He said he'd put the U.S. military on, quote, high alert status, unquote, and said he'd taken security precautions to ensure the functioning of the U.S. government. It's unclear when President Bush will be heading back to Washington. It is clear that in Washington, enormous security measures have been taken place. As soon as it was clear that it was a terrorism act underway, the Vice President and the First Lady, Laura Bush, were taken to an undisclosed secure location. Congressional leaders were hustled away from the U.S. Capitol area to safety. Where they all are is still unclear at this hour. We can also tell you that the second city that was under attack today in Washington, the Pentagon building was hit. There was a car bomb outside the State Department, and there was a plane crash near Camp David. We've been reporting for most of the morning that the activity around the Pentagon appeared to be, well, certainly light in comparison to what had happened in New York, but it is clear that the devastation at the Pentagon building is more serious than we had first thought. The officials now saying it took a direct, devastating hit from an aircraft, and that there are numerous casualties. Let me clarify the U.S.-Canadian border. There have been back and forth reports for the last little while. Anecdotal evidence by our reporters on the scene is the border was still open. In fact, it is. The U.S. Embassy and Canadian officials both saying the border is open. Some posts are closed for a few hours, were closed for a few hours after the attacks, but they have now been reopened. You can be sure, though, if you are traveling in that direction by car, that you're going to be in for a long wait at whatever border crossing you're going to. More information. The Canadian Blood Services, we've got one report, at least from Calgary, that they're asking for donations. One assumes this is taking place across the country. If you are in the position to donate blood that would eventually be used to be sent to New York, please call the Canadian Blood Services in your area to have a connection with them to find out whether or not they are looking for blood. Okay, I think that brings you fairly up to date with the... We'll run down through the aircraft again in a few moments' time, but you heard the comments from George W. Bush. We should see them shortly. He's in a location, a secure location in Louisiana, and tape of those remarks is not filtered out to the networks around the world, but we do expect those shortly, and he still may be speaking to his nation and to the world, in fact, at a short time as well. Colin Powell, the U.S. Secretary of State, we said was traveling in South America. He's now on his way back to the United States, but he did have comments to make before he boarded his aircraft, and here they are.
A terrible, terrible tragedy has befallen my nation, but has befallen all the nations of this region, all the nations of the world, and befallen all those who believe in democracy. Once again, we see terrorism, we see terrorists, people who don't believe in democracy, people who believe that with the destruction of buildings, with the murder of people, they can somehow achieve a political purpose. They can destroy buildings, they can kill people, and we will be saddened by this tragedy, but they will never be allowed to kill the spirit of democracy. They cannot destroy our society. They cannot destroy our belief in the democratic way. You can be sure that America will deal with this tragedy in a way that brings those responsible to justice. You can be sure that as terrible a day as this is for us, we will get through it because we are a strong nation, a nation that believes in itself.
Colin Powell at a conference in Lima, Peru, and his comments and the resolve of the American administration being shown through his remarks and through the remarks just a short time ago from George W. Bush, that punishment will be meted out, and severely, once they know the direction that punishment should take. We'll continue to monitor the situation, obviously, in the United States Capitol and members of the U.S. administration. Let's go out to St. John's, Newfoundland. We all know that Newfoundland has been the reception area for a number of overseas flights over the years for varying reasons. Today, very much so. Linda Calvert joins us today from just outside the St. John's Airport. Linda, busy place today?
Well, yeah, Peter. Actually, I'm standing on a hill just outside the airport. We actually couldn't get a TV signal right out of the airport, but if you can see behind me, if we can get a shot of this, there are actually about 18 to 20 wide-body jets sitting on the tarmac right now, so it's almost a parking lot out there, and a jammed parking lot at that, Peter. This is a very small airport, and one of the airport managers that I spoke to just a few moments ago said that they can really only handle about 16 wide-body jets here, and clearly this isn't over yet. In fact, just a few moments before I spoke to you, another plane landed. Now, as for the people that are actually sitting aboard those jets, their fate is pretty up in the air, pretty unclear at this point. Only one plane has been allowed to let its passengers off. And as an airport manager that I spoke to said to me, their main concern with these people is security issues. They just want to find out who these people are. So right now, the people who've been let off that plane are on the tarmac, and they're being surrounded by police and questioned. Now, do you know the origin of these aircraft? Were they coming from Europe, from overseas, heading towards the U.S. and Canada, or are they going the other way, or do we know? We know very little about this. We've been told that they're here from all over the world, but airport officials are releasing very, very little information about where they were going. All right. Linda Calvert reporting to us from St. John's, Newfoundland, a scene that is being repeated in different airports across North America today, as all aircraft were ordered grounded, and aircraft are on the ground now in locations across North America, and no air travel is supposed to be taking place. Let's go to George W. Bush in Louisiana, the U.S. president facing his first major international crisis.
Well, obviously we're having a technical problem. Let me just tell you what, again, the president...
Well, clearly we are all having a major problem with this. That was not live. I was telling you there were comments that the U.S. president made in Louisiana a few moments ago, and the tape now being rushed to a point that can be fed. Let's try this again now and see whether we can hear these remarks from the U.S. president. No, they're still having trouble monitoring the here we go. All right. Okay, we're now told that, in fact, they've now sorted out these problems. The sound may be a little difficult, but they're going to try it again. Let's listen in. This was
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested. But make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
George W. Bush speaking at a U.S. Air Force base in Louisiana, where he was whisked away to from an engagement he had in Florida earlier this morning. He's now at that base in Louisiana. His next stop still to be determined. When he will be going back to Washington, still unclear. His remarks in reaction to this scene in New York City today, repeated at a lower level in Washington and elsewhere in the country. A massive terrorist strike against the U.S. Government and its institutions. 2 aircraft hijacked, slammed into the World Trade Center. Both towers hit. Both towers have since fallen. It is unclear how many people were inside at the time of this, but estimates range anywhere from 20,000 to 50,000. The mayor of New York City has already prepared his city and the nation for staggering death toll figures when all is said and done at the end of this. Also in the United States, in Washington, a car bomb attack outside the State Department, and what is being now described by Pentagon officials as a devastating hit, another aircraft slamming into the Pentagon building just across the Potomac River from the White House and the Capitol building. So the situation in the United States, the president calling on his people to pray for those who have lost their lives today, and to say thanks for those who are working so desperately to try and save the lives of the wounded. In terms of actual details of what happened today, very scarce. His main sentence, freedom itself was attacked by a faceless coward today. Those are the words of the U.S. president, which would seem to indicate they still do not know exactly what they're dealing with in terms of who did the attack, who is responsible, how exactly they are going to respond to this. Still other incidents at this hour unclear. There are other aircraft said to be lost. Where and how, we do not know. We can give you the confirmed flights that have been involved in the various hijackings today. These are the ones. American Airlines Flight 11, which was bound from Boston to Los Angeles. I just want to give you the exact details on which one of these various aircraft were involved in the different This Flight 11 was the first to slam into the World Trade Center about 8:45 Eastern Time this morning. It was carrying 81 passengers, 9 flight attendants, 2 pilots, for a total of 92 people on board. Then American Airlines Flight 77, a Boeing 757 flying from Washington to Dulles, Washington Dulles Airport to Los Angeles. It was the second plane into the World Trade Center. It carried 58 passengers, 4 attendants, 2 pilots, a total of 64 people on board. Then the United Airlines Flight 175, a Boeing 767 from Boston to L.A. The airline has confirmed it has crashed, but it is not saying where. It left Boston at 7:58 this morning, bound for Los Angeles. 56 passengers on board, 7 flight attendants, 2 pilots, a total of 65 people. They're not saying where. We do know an aircraft crashed in Washington at the Pentagon building. We're told it was a devastating hit. We'd been led to believe it was a small aircraft. We do not know that for sure. It may have been this. United Airlines Flight 93, Boeing 757 from Newark to San Francisco. It crashed outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It was carrying 38 passengers, 5 flight attendants, and 2 pilots for a total of 45 people. It crashed near Pittsburgh at about 10 o'clock. Those are the details on the aircraft involved. The major devastation, though, here in New York City, where literally thousands of people are said to have been killed in the attack on the World Trade Center, with both towers crashing down. It's been almost 3 hours since the towers hit the ground. The smoke still pouring over the New York City skyline. There were reports that there was a gas leak in the area, not surprising, when those buildings toppled over, and that firefighters were having a tremendous difficulty in containing the fire caused from that and the ensuing problems in the neighboring area. We already know that one other building has toppled down from the after effects of the toppling of the 2 huge World Trade Center towers. There are reports coming from the mayor of New York City, Rudolph Giuliani, that many of the city's finest firefighters were inside the World Trade Center trying to deal with the initial problems when the buildings collapsed. A report from New York City's hospitals. Hundreds of people rushed to Manhattan hospitals to give blood, and officials called in every surgeon, every nurse to deal with victims of the attacks. Ambulances screamed up and down the major thoroughfares across the city. We're on full alert. People are covered with concrete soot and other flying objects. We're in desperate need of blood. That is the desperate call coming out of New York, and that's why you're seeing cities across this country respond. If you are able to help, please call your Canadian Blood Service office in your community and ask them if they are on top of the situation in terms of taking blood donations for New York. This is going to be something that continues for days yet. Canada's Solicitor General has made a number of comments in the last little while. Let's hear what he has to say. His name's Lawrence Macaulay. He was talking in, I believe, in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. Here's what he had to say.
Wake of what's happened in the United States?
Well, of course, as you know, this has just happened, a horrifying situation, and I've just talked to the director of CSIS and PMO, and we will, of course, offer any, as we always do, support to the U.S. in this desperate situation. My sympathy goes out certainly to the victims, and there are many of them, so I understand it looks like a horrifying act of terrorism, but again, there's a lot of detail that has to be found. But I have to return to Ottawa to be unseen, and that's what I'm doing right now.
What steps is Canada
taking to secure whatever it must in this country?
Well, as we have a security intelligence team and the RCMP who work, as I've always said, with security intelligence agencies around the world, and I would expect they're doing that. So is the U.S. This is a horrifying event. Act of terrorism that we all must work together on, and that's exactly what our security forces are doing. But of course, I don't have the in-depth detail of every step that the Security Intelligence Agency take, but obviously we have a very strong security intelligence teams in the U.S. and in this country. Obviously, there's been a desperate, terrifying act of terrorism, that we will all have to deal with.
Anything being done with respect to the airports, for example, that seems to have been a vehicle to really attack strategic points in the United States.
Well, of course, that's up to our police forces, and that should they decide to close our airports. But as you know, all airports in the U.S. are down.
What's your advice?
I expect that my suggestion would be that we have to take every possible measure in order to provide security, but it's always been taken. Obviously, in a powerful country like the United States, this has certainly been breached, and
But are you heightening security anywhere in this country, around the Prime
I would
Minister,
expect
at the airports?
all security would be heightened in this country with an event like this taking place.
Do you know if the Prime Minister is going to be in Nova Scotia as planned?
All security to be heightened across Canada as a result of this event in the United States, so says the Solicitor General Lawrence McCauley, who was in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia today. He is now on his way back to the nation's capital. You heard him being asked at the last moment whether the Prime Minister was still heading towards Nova Scotia today. He is not. He's staying in Ottawa to be at the head of the table dealing with emergency matters there. Briefly, the U.S. medical response. We were talking earlier of blood donations desperately needed in New York City. In Washington, the Health and Human Services Department has activated a national medical emergency plan. As many as 7,000 doctors, nurses, and volunteers heading from different locations. These are the emergency response teams. They're in different parts of the country for various disaster programs. They're all banding together, all being called upon to head towards New York to help with what is a devastating situation there on the southern end of the island of Manhattan. You heard a moment ago we went out to St. John's, Newfoundland to talk to Linda Calvert of all the aircraft landing there. The major overseas aircraft that have been diverted from U.S. airports have landed in Newfoundland. I think she said 16 or 17 at count then, which was causing enormous problems at the St. John's airport. Obviously, they're not going to turn any aircraft away as long as they've got space to sit them on. In Halifax, the situation is even more drastic than that. Paul Withers joins us from the Halifax airport. Paul?
Peter, right now about 23 international flights are on the ground in Halifax. They expect another 27 more before the afternoon is over. We're told in a briefing that ended here in Halifax just moments ago that right now about 70 aircraft are in the air between St. John's and between Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. Again, about 27 of those will be landing in Halifax. We're told that some airports in Atlantic Canada have reached the saturation point. They cannot take any more aircraft. Right now, the 23 that are basically essentially parked here at Halifax Airport, all of the passengers are on board. We're told that because of security concerns that the RCMP have, that the passengers will be deplaned, will be with their hand luggage, and will be searched and then taken on to various sportsplexes in the Halifax metropolitan region to be put up for the night. Halifax, like every other Canadian airport, essentially shut down today as they deal with this. All domestic flights, of course, canceled. Here, the runways in Halifax are beginning to fill up, as you can see behind me. Airlines from all over the world that were caught in the air by that disaster in New York and Washington earlier today are being diverted. Halifax, again, expecting 27 more flights. Briefing at about 3 o'clock Eastern time today with more from the Halifax airport. Situation here, hundreds on the ground waiting to get off the plane. Some of them have been on the ground here in Halifax for hours. They will be taken to various sportsplexes to put up with them. There are so many. All of the hotels in the Halifax area full up, no room in the inn. We're told people are renting cars and driving in the opposite direction of Halifax in search of a room. No doubt that the devastating events in the United States have essentially paralyzed air travel in this country as well. Peter?
Paul, thanks very much. Good report from Paul Withers in Halifax, and he'll be attending that briefing in, I guess, about 30 minutes' time. And if there's more to update on the situation there, we will certainly go back to Paul. Let's check in with Los Angeles Airport. We told you an hour or so ago that the word was out that LAX, one of the biggest airports in the world, was about to be evacuated. Steve Futterman is standing by at Los Angeles Airport. Steve, what's the latest there? Okay,
Can you hear me?
Okay, we can hear you now, Steve. Go ahead.
Peter, we're being told that there's going to be a briefing in around 6 minutes here at Los Angeles International Airport. Yes, I'm being told by a police officer now that to go to another direction. But we're being told there will be a briefing here in around 6-7 minutes about what has taken place. But obviously a great deal of attention being focused at Los Angeles International Airport because 3 of the flights were scheduled to arrive here. In fact, the initial flight we've been talking about all morning, that's Flight 11 on American Airlines from Boston to Los Angeles, would have been arriving in around 30, 40 minutes from now. We have seen some FBI officials at the airport today. We have seen a few relatives of those who are on the flight arriving here, escorted in by airline official and law enforcement personnel. The airport itself, the terminals have been completely shut down. Only security personnel are inside. All of the flights have been canceled. The few flights that were allowed to continue in that were supposed to arrive in Los Angeles have been diverted to other airports in the Southern California area. So no planes landing here today. It's almost a complete ghost town, Los Angeles Airport. And if you've ever been at this airport, which I know you have, Peter, a very unusual scene that we've really never witnessed before. You know, Steve, the city of Los Angeles and the whole west coast of the U.S., waking up to this story when it was fully in play already and many of the details known. Any sense of gauging the reaction on the west coast of the U.S. to this? Yeah, well, you know, I woke up to the news as well. I happened to be up when just a few moments after the first plane hit the World Trade Center. But as you mentioned, most people were not up that early, and when they awoke, they turned on the radio. Every radio station here in Southern California, whether it be normally a music station, a sports talk station, or a news station, obviously, they're devoting wall-to-wall coverage to this event. So everyone, I would say, pretty much is aware of what has taken place. The city of Los Angeles has, I think, most metropolitan areas in the U.S. and North America, in fact, has gone on a heightened state of alert. Many of the landmark buildings in Los Angeles have not opened up, buildings that people might feel would be targets if someone wanted to make a terrorist attack in Los Angeles. So those buildings have not even opened up for business. Most people really just staying home today. All right, Steve, thanks very much. Steve Futterman reporting to us from Los Angeles and the situation at LAX, the Los Angeles airport, which, as Steve says, looks like a ghost town right now. No one around, with the exception of FBI officials monitoring the arrival area of what would have been a couple of flights that were hijacked and crashed in the eastern United States this morning. A further update on the story I just mentioned to you a few moments ago about the terrible situation inside the World Trade Center, where firefighters, some of New York's finest, were in there trying to deal with the fire situation and rescue people who were trapped inside the World Trade Center. They themselves then became victims when the Twin Towers fell down. One estimate now is that 200 firefighters are missing in the collapse of the World Trade Center. That just gives you an indication. 200, an incredible figure, a massive figure for a number of firefighters. But we're dealing with the collapse of these buildings here, where there is the potential for thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of people who were inside the moment this building collapsed. Further reaction from different parts of the world. The Pope has now issued a statement condemning the attacks as an unspeakable horror, John Paul called it, which thrust the United States into, in his words, a dark and tragic moment. Let's go back to Washington, where the CBC's David Holton has been trying to determine just how the U.S. government is responding to all this. David, we heard the president's remarks on tape just a short time ago, and his comments about freedom itself being under attack here. When you hear his words and deconstruct what he had to say, what's your sense?
Well, I think clearly President Bush, Peter, was trying to reassure Americans, saying that all appropriate measures will be taken to protect Americans, assuring them that U.S. forces both at home and abroad have been put on full alert. But, you know, millions of Americans watching that must have noticed where the president was making his address. It was at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. Now, normally in a crisis like this, the president would fly back to Washington. He was in Florida, of course, earlier this morning. But the very fact that he made that address at this Air Force Base in Louisiana was one indication of the gravity that the administration is taking this situation. Apprehension clearly at that point about the president returning directly to Washington. We now hear that he will leave the air base shortly, but his officials aren't saying whether he will come back to Washington. But you can probably see behind me, we're in the superpower capital of the world, and we heard Steve Futterman talk about a ghost town at Los Angeles Airport. Here we are 2 blocks from the White House. Normally that street behind me, 14th Street, is swarming with cars, packed with people going out to lunch over the lunch hour. Now, as you can see, there's hardly a car on that street and hardly anyone walking in the streets. The evacuation order from federal buildings here has been extraordinarily effective.
David, just as you were talking, a U.S. official speaking, I gather on some form of background, whether it was at the State Department, I'm not sure, saying now that there are some indications people with bin Laden links, that's Osama bin Laden, are behind the attacks. This has been the suspicion that obviously a number of different experts, and when we were talking to Neil MacDonald suggesting the same thing just a short time ago, this will certainly have a major impact on the complexion of this story, as Osama bin Laden has been one of those who the U.S. has been after in a large degree over the past couple of years, considered responsible for a number of attacks. This now, if this is the case in which this is heading, the pressure is going to be enormous now on the U.S. administration to try to deal with this man.
It will indeed, but I think we should be very careful about that first report coming out of an unidentified official in Washington saying, quote, that there are some indications that these bombing attacks may be linked to Osama bin Laden. I think at this stage it's a little premature. Clearly the administration's under huge pressure to give a sense that they know what is happening, that they might have some idea who is responsible for this. But as you'll recall, in the African embassy bombings, there were a lot of false leads that were explored before the culprits in that case were caught. So I think we should be a little careful at this point of unidentified statements coming out of the U.S. administration pointing to Osama bin Laden.
Okay, good point, and point taken and accepted. John McCain, the senator, the Republican senator from Arizona, he making comments today about the overall security capabilities of the United States after a day like this, questioning just whether or not a full evaluation of the U.S. security arrangements are needed, one, and two, that because of what happened today, the American public is going to have to get used to a very different kind of America in terms of the security requirements that are going to be needed.
Well, the authorities always say after terrorist incidents like this that they're not going to succumb to a state of siege. But, gosh, after these attacks, I think there'll be tremendous pressure to tighten security at airports, at ports, at borders along the both in Canada and Mexico. The amazing thing is, for anyone who travels regularly, as I do in the U.S., is that the security, by and large, is pretty good. At most airports here, you are searched carefully. How those hijackers got aboard the aircraft with explosives will remain a huge mystery, and something that will be very difficult to identify, although there is hope, we're told, that the black boxes will be recovered from those aircraft that might at least give some sense of how this tragedy happened.
Yeah, we are being, one network is reporting now that there was a form of communication from one of the aircraft that hit the World Trade Center that it had been hijacked. It appears that it was, we were talking to a former American Airlines pilot just a little while ago, David. I don't know whether you actually had a chance to hear him, but he was saying there is a way on board the aircraft that without having to give voice communication, there is a button that can be pushed that will give instant communication to ground authorities that the plane has been hijacked, and it appears that, in fact, is what happened in the case of at least one of the aircraft, which would suggest that the pilots were certainly in control for some time. just for how long or not we don't know. As that pilot in Calgary had mentioned to us, inconceivable for him to imagine a commercial airline pilot directing his aircraft into a building even with a gun at his head, and suggesting that the pilots may have been eliminated before anything like that happened. But as you say, the black boxes should tell the story if they are recoverable, which obviously will be a difficult part of the next few days in the investigation process. David, we'll be back to you in a minute because I want to get your latest update on the Pentagon situation, because it clearly appears that story has changed. But I want to switch from David Halton in Washington to Ian Hannamansing, who joins us now from the BC Washington State border. Ian, what's the situation there?
Well, Peter, this border crossing, known to many people around here as the Peace Arch crossing, on a normal day would be the third busiest traffic crossing between Canada and the United States. As you can probably see over my left-hand side, there is a little bit of traffic, but not very much. At the Peace Arch monument itself, there's an inscription that says, "May these gates never be closed." Well, they were closed for at least 20 minutes about a couple of hours ago. Now it's open, but open in a very limited way, Peter. There's an RCMP checkpoint about half a kilometer south of here on the Canadian side, obviously. They're winnowing out traffic, and the traffic that they know won't be allowed through the border, they're diverting right at that point. What is being allowed at this point, as we understand it, is U.S. citizens are being allowed back into their country, and others with what U.S. immigration officials consider to be official business. One of our journalists, Alan Waterman, about an hour and a half ago, went through the border crossing to see what would happen. They checked his ID extensively. They were convinced that he was what he said he was, a CBC journalist. They put a spike belt in front of the vehicle as it got to the actual border point, as many of our viewers would understand. Obviously quite unusual circumstances in a border crossing where traffic usually flows relatively freely back and forth. 5 immigration officers checked every nook and cranny of his vehicle. That's what they're doing to the various vehicles through here. So not many cars here, but as you can imagine, Peter, traffic is moving very slowly.
Absolutely. And Ian, just to underline that, authorities now saying that the border will remain open right across the country between Canada and the U.S. It had been closed in a number of places for a few hours, but it's reopening in all, although, as Ian points out, expect long delays as you witness the ones behind him at the BC Washington State main border crossing at this hour, 10:30 in the morning out there in BC. Ian, thanks very much. We'll get back to you if things develop out there. More information coming out of the situation in terms of where U.S. bases around the world are on alert. They're on high alert in Japan right now. More than 50,000 Americans are stationed at bases in Japan, and as a result of what's happened today, they are now on high alert. The U.S. President saying, in fact, that they're on alert all around the world, especially right now in the United States. We did mention to you a short time ago that the major financial markets across North America have been closed for the day, have been for some time now. That's, of course, the markets in New York and also here in Toronto. Officials taking no chances at a number of major facilities. An example, the CN Tower here in Toronto has been closed today. No comment made on why, but I think it's probably obvious. Also, 35 flights now wind up on the runway in Halifax, or on the tarmac situation in Halifax. And as we saw in our reports from Halifax and from St. John's, well, we've got a news conference going on just about to begin in Toronto at Queen's Park. Premier Mike Harris on this subject. Let's hear what he has to say.
Okay. The shocking events of the last hours have touched us all, and today's sad and horrific violence concerns every citizen of the world. While apparently directed towards the United States, our neighbor and our longtime ally, these evil and despicable acts are an affront to the peaceful men and women of the world everywhere. Our thoughts and prayers are first with the countless individuals and families whose lives have been affected by these tragedies. Their loss, their pain, their sorrow is shared by every human being everywhere. We have offered assistance to the United States and New York governments. I have instructed all branches of the provincial government that Ontario will provide whatever support is needed. I know many individual citizens of Ontario will want to lend their personal assistance, but at this point it is too early to determine what specific help might be required. Those able to do so are encouraged to donate blood. Those with medical or other special expertise may subsequently be called upon, and announcements about where and how individuals can help will be made as that information becomes available. I want to say to all of the people of Ontario and indeed Canada that there is no report of any known threat to Canada. However, I have directed provincial officials to work with the federal and municipal governments to take every precaution and to coordinate our responses. Emergency measures officials continue to meet. Finally, if Ontario can do anything to help U.S. authorities track down those responsible for this cowardly violence, rest assured we will leave no stone unturned. And I am personally committed to doing everything in my power to assist. Again, I offer on behalf of all Ontarians our sympathies and our prayers to all of the families who are being affected by today's events. Before I leave to go back to assist with coordinating our response, I want to introduce Dr. James Young, who is responsible for public safety. He heads up Emergency Measures Ontario, and he will answer any specific questions that you may have now, and he will lead Ontario's response. James.
Thank you. Thank you, Premier. Okay. Are there any questions that ladies and gentlemen have?
Dr. Young, what specific things is provincial officials looking at to help New York State?
Well, there are a number of potential areas, and with any disaster such as this, it will take really some time for New York to determine exactly what they need and the scope and nature of their disaster. But immediately it comes to mind that the first and foremost thing that we'll look at is whether we can offer any assistance in the healthcare field, because the priority becomes on the living as a number one priority. The second potential measure would be with search and rescue and offering assistance in regards to search and rescue, and disaster management comes to mind as a third area. And in the long term, obviously, there may be tremendous forensic problems and investigative problems, and the province is willing to offer any assistance in regards to those matters as well.
Do you think that any of the victims in New York City could be brought up here for treatment?
It certainly, if that was asked and the province could provide that assistance, the province would do so. And plans are being made now that if that is an issue that we can assist, we'll do so.
Doctor, how many beds do you have at your disposal in the area that could help on New York?
We don't know specifically a number of beds right now, but the hospital certainly immediately sprang into action with the disaster this morning, and are looking very carefully at what they do and what they don't do in the way of elective surgery right now, in order to, until the scope of the disaster is understood, ensure that in fact that we can be of any assistance that we can be.
Dr. Young, the Premier refers to the fact while there's no report of any known threat to Canada, he's instructed provincial officials to take every precaution and to coordinate our responses. What precautions is the Ontario government contemplating at this point?
Well, the number one thing that we did at 11:08 this morning was to fully mobilize the Provincial Operations Centre. This brings into force all of the ministries of government. There are also meetings and discussions taking place at all levels with the federal government and municipal officials. Various deputy ministers within sectors such as health have held meetings and discussed matters among themselves so that they can mutually cooperate, as have Emergency Measures Canada, Emergency Measures Ontario, and the municipal emergency operations, for example, Ottawa, Toronto, Windsor are all mobilized at this point in time. And so that kind of coordination and cooperation and discussion is taking place to look after any problems that currently exist and to, with the anticipation that we may be able to assist.
No tangible examples of any measures that have been taken yet, however?
The
preparations for what New York State might ultimately...
That's right. There haven't been any necessary measures other than probably the Ministry of Transportation, the Ontario Provincial Police have been looking at traffic flows in and around the border points. The airport is obviously on heightened security, and the necessary measures have been taken relative to that, but nothing concrete has been necessary at this point in time because there has not been any perceived threat to Canadians.
Have you sent provincial employees home, or are they still all at work as far as your...
No, the provincial employees in most centres are still at work. There are a few buildings that provincial employees have left. Most commonly for one of two reasons: either the sensitivity of the area that they work near, or if they're in a building owned by a landlord who decided they wanted to close the building, then those are the provincial employees that have been sent home at this point in time. I believe 2 or 3. I was the last number I had. 400 University Avenue was one, and I think there may be a smaller building nearby, the U.S. consulate that has Ministry of Tourism in it, and then I believe one of the Cadillac Fairview buildings, and it may, I'm not sure exactly which one.
Do we have a plan in place should, in the event that something like that should happen in Toronto?
Yes, there is a counterterrorism plan in place in Toronto. And this is worked on by all levels of government that include the federal government, the provincial government, and the municipality, in concert with the municipal police. That plan has been looked at and reviewed, and a lot of work done on it, in fact, in recent times.
Would it help in a situation like this, though?
Any plan...
All right, James Young, the Chief Coroner of Ontario, and Premier Mike Harris from a few moments ago on his reaction to the devastating news out of the United States today of the terrorist attacks there, which have claimed an enormous toll. We do not have a figure, and we're not looking forward to hearing what it is. If you've seen the devastation, and I'm sure you have, you know that that number is going to be very high. It's a live shot from New York City, where still the skyline is covered in the smoke and debris that more than 3 hours after the collapse of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center occurred at about 10:30 local time this morning. The last tower dropped after being hit by aircraft about 90 minutes before then. Hijacked aircraft on clearly a form of a terrorist action. Now, we're trying to update the situation not only obviously in New York, Washington, where there were actions as well, but also across this country, which has been trying to deal with the situation. You heard Premier Mike Harris saying there will be an immediate attempt to offer help to the Americans, and certainly blood donations are going to be high on the list of the help that is needed. But also airports across this country are stacking up now with aircraft that are being diverted from the United States to airports in Canada. We've already seen in Newfoundland, in Nova Scotia, where the airports are almost full now, the tarmac areas of major flights from that were heading towards the United States. Marnie Kagan joins us now from the Calgary airport, where the situation, I guess, Marnie, is somewhat similar.
It is actually, Peter. We've received 2 flights in the last hour, international flights. One was from London en route to San Francisco. Spoke to some people coming off that flight. They were told, well, actually, before they were even told they were being diverted to Calgary, they sort of saw it on the little flight screens where you can see where the flight is. They saw it change from San Francisco to Calgary. The pilot came on, told them they were being diverted, and then flight attendants came around and told people individually why they were being diverted to Calgary.
Now, any indication of just how many aircraft Calgary Airport can handle in terms of the overflow that's one assumes still happening?
No, I'm not sure if we will be seeing any more international flights coming in today. Right now we're being told that all they know about is those two that have already landed. And we have some planes being moved around here. That's what you're hearing here, but it's not one of the ones that have landed. Calgary can handle about 400 flights a day leaving the airport. All of those have been canceled, so there are no flights leaving the Calgary airport right now.
All right, Marnie Kagan reporting to us from the Calgary airport as the situation across the country is showing a certain similarity, although clearly more aircraft on the Canadian East Coast in both Halifax and in St. John's. Here's the situation at White Rock, British Columbia, the border crossing with the U.S. Ian Hannamansing reporting to us just a little while ago about the long lineups there. Traffic is getting through, but if you're heading in that direction or you know somebody is, expect long delays and an intense look at your vehicle and your documents when you cross into the United States. There had been reports earlier that the U.S.-Canadian border was closed. It was in a couple of places for a short period of time, but it is open now, although long delays are expected. Okay, a number of things to bring you up to date. First of all, the Prime Minister is expected to speak here in the lobby outside the House of Commons in about 25 minutes' time, I believe 2:15 Ottawa time. The Prime Minister will have a statement. He'd already issued one earlier talking about the cowardly act that had taken place in the United States. We'll, of course, be covering Prime Minister Chrétien's comments live. Now, let me go through some of the more details that we're picking up in these past few minutes as we've been bouncing around this country and the United States on various briefings. There are reports now that the U.S. Navy has dispatched 5 battleships, have left Norfolk, Virginia, to be deployed along the east coast of the United States, plus aircraft carriers off New York. We'd heard one of them being the John F. Kennedy was to be deployed into the New York harbor area. Clearly, American officials now taking no chances about any repeats. We haven't heard of any events in the last couple of hours. There certainly were enough already earlier in the day, at least 4 hijackings, perhaps 5. Unclear at this hour on that. New York City, the worst hit. Washington has been hit. An aircraft down in Pennsylvania. An amazing story being told out of the Pennsylvania story. By the way, just to further emphasize this blood situation, you heard Premier Harris asking for it, and we ask you anywhere you are in the country, if there are facilities in your area to give blood donations, you probably should head down there now. There's a serious blood shortage, we're told, in Washington, D.C. hospitals. You can imagine what it must be like in New York City right now. I want to tell you this story coming out of the Pennsylvania crash. One of the aircraft that crashed in Pennsylvania, apparently one of the passengers who was on board the aircraft that had been hijacked managed to lock himself in the washroom on board the aircraft and used his cell phone to call and was able to reach somebody on the ground. An emergency dispatcher in a neighboring county received a cell phone call from a man who said he was a passenger locked in the bathroom on that flight. Repeatedly told officials the call was not a hoax. We are being hijacked. We're being hijacked. The man is quoted as saying. He has a transcript of that call. This is the Pennsylvania area where that plane eventually crashed. No survivors. It's still not determined exactly what happened on that flight, but it was hijacked, and it did crash. One of 4 known and confirmed crashes. There is still some speculation of a 5th, but it's unclear. There's also, let me see, it's also being reported that U.S. Senate leaders and House of Representative leaders have been taken away by the U.S. Secret Service to an undisclosed location. We already know that's certainly the case for both the Vice President, Dick Cheney, and the First Lady, Laura Bush, who was still in Washington. Her husband, of course, the President, was in Florida this morning and is now in Louisiana. And as David Holton quite rightly pointed out, quite a scene for the American public with Washington under attack, New York under attack. It would not it was certainly obvious to all watching that the President of the United States, the security officials had chosen that he not go back to Washington, that instead he is in a U.S. Air Force base in Louisiana. When he's leaving and where he may be going from that, we do not know. All right. Back to the situation in New York. This is a live shot. Still smoke, debris pouring out of the area where the World Trade Center used to stand. The stories that you will hear over the next days of heroism on the part of those desperately trying to save the people who were in that building, trapped in it, people leaping out of windows, or reports of people jumping from as high as 30 stories, obviously without success in their leap, trying to avert the devastation that was around them and was about to engulf them. Many of those who were on the scene first were New York City firefighters. I want to show you some tape of some of them who have been working desperately in these last few hours. The men and women of the New York City Fire Department who've been inside the buildings and the areas immediately surrounding the World Trade Center, trying to help those, and obviously having devastating effects on their own situation. This is just an indication of what it looks like there and the streets immediately surrounding that area. And this was just shortly after the buildings collapsed. And you've seen the pictures with the smoke and the debris still coming out of the sky hours later. So we have a country under siege, a city in devastation, just south of us in the United States. These are not pictures from some far off and distant land. This is our neighbor, and this is New York City, today, September 11th, 2001.
Two guys in the hospital. I think they're doing pretty well. They're okay. Everybody's good. We'll miss. I was on the 24th floor. Went up in the elevator. As soon as we got up in the elevator, we lost power in the elevator, and then we just worked our way down the stairs. But there was tons of company giving maydays. We lost tons of guys. Terrible. What were you able to do once you were up there?
The sights and sounds of those who are trying desperately to deal with the situation in that last story. That firefighter who got up to the 24th floor of the World Trade Center, one of the towers, lost power in the elevator, had to come back down. Shortly after that, the whole building collapsed, and as he said, he lost many of his fellow firefighters in that. The mayor of New York City saying there are at least 200 firefighters missing, men and women who were inside that building trying to help the thousands who were trapped inside. All right, from New York, let's go back to Washington. We're joined by phone by freelance journalist Peter Bergen, who's an expert on terrorism matters, who has worked extensively on covering stories like this and the aftermath of stories like this, although there has never been a story like this, but I think you know what I mean. Peter, your thoughts on what we've seen and obviously what is on the minds of so many people. Actually, we're going to quick go to Ottawa. Jean Chrétien.
I don't think that we have seen anything as horrible as what happened this morning. Alors, mes premiers mots seront pour offrir mes condoléances au peuple américain.
Prime Minister saying first he wants to send his condolences to the American people.
Des êtres chers ce matin. As you know, it is a situation that is extremely difficult for the United States. I've been in touch with the American authorities, and I've been in touch too with the Canadian ambassador and the information about the Canadians in New York. And so far, there is nobody from Canada that's been affected. For the security, I have been in touch with the ministers and with the head of the agencies to make sure that everything was to remain secure, and we said to everybody to remain calm. I would like to thank Canadians who have kept their calm in these last 4 hours, and that we hope that the situation will come to a little bit more normality quickly. Pour moi, je pense que dans les circonstances,
I think that in these circumstances, we have to pray for the families, for American citizens, and I have assured the American authorities that Canada will do everything it can to help them in this very difficult situation, an unprecedented crisis, unprecedented for a long time.
I hope that Canadians will show their solidarity with our neighbors, and the news to come are when we discover the number of people who died will be probably very tragic, and it's creating a very difficult situation around the world. So I hope that I will be able to speak later on with the President of the United States.
Prime Minister, what kind of assistance are you offering?